I was didn't want to interrupt. I actually was interested in the conversation, but I was asking you a few questions here on the side because education is a particular passionate topic of mine. So I was very interested in hearing your ideas on that from a TI angle.
Well, very happy you're here, and let me just do the intro here again. You did the intro there with a little bit of I started recording. We got a little bit of that stuff, but welcome to Talking with Famous People. My name's host Eric. I'm here with a very special and surprise guest, Chad Crandall, and he was just indicating he was curious about some of my thoughts about education. I'm very curious about his thoughts about how childhood affects how MBTI manifests. Like, I tend to type my kids in middle school. Do you think that's too early to get a definitive typing off people?
Personally, no, I don't. I think there are some challenges that are associated with that, but I don't think it's impossible. Of course, MBTI recommends that you don't type children under 16 years old for whatever reason, but I do think that's because it's hard to verify type that early, as a child is kind of finding their way through their life, and they're willing to try new things or different angles or different approaches. For me specifically, I would definitely say that my type was pretty consistent all throughout my youth. I've tried other things, but it wasn't as natural. Someone would tell me to do something, and I would be like, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to do it my way, which was kind of indicative of my type anyway.
So you learned about MBTI typing and cognitive functions fairly early in your life?
No, actually, it was until I started really studying about 14 years old, so about, 14 years ago, I think that I really got into starting understanding type, different personality segments. Of course, MBTI came much later for me, but I started looking into psychology and why people behaved in certain ways. I didn't hear about MBTI until probably 6 years ago.
Interesting. I learned about it first when I was about 30 years old. I just learned about MBTI. I didn't know anything about cognitive functions. And I just discovered the cognitive function model maybe a year and a half ago at most. So I was happy to discover it because, just looking at MBTI without understanding cognitive functions, as I did when I first encountered it, it was exciting to see a description of my type and feel like, oh, now I know what's wrong with me. But at the same time, it wasn't particularly deep in the analysis because it wasn't about cognitive functions. And back then on the internet, there really wasn't a lot of talk about the cognitive function aspect of it.
And that's kind of what led me to MBTI too. Was I was like, what the heck is wrong with me? Maybe there's other people like me who are half crazy. Let me see if it's actually a psychological condition or if there's other people out there that are like me. And so I was looking for very similar people, and I wound up seeing MBTI, and I'm like, man, that's kind of describes me. Did someone read my bio and write this?
Right.
So I was like, there's got to be more to this, and I looked into socionics a little bit, and everybody tends to think that I hate socionics. I don't. It's just I don't know enough about it to put an opinion on it. And so I just kind of avoid the subject because I have no valid opinion when it comes to socionics.
Are we supposed to know about things before having opinions on them?
No, not personally, but I don't like not knowing. Competence is a really important quality to mine, and I'm not going to be out there preaching about something I don't know about.
I discover whether I know about something as I'm telling people about it.
Maybe that's the any preference of yours. I kind of want to know and have a good firm handle on it before I start moving into the real dissecting of that particular quality. But again, I've learned as I've made my videos in the past, I went through a process of really identifying, hey, I learned from this video, and I'm still getting people commenting on my old videos as I was talking and learning. And I'm like, hey, here's an updated video, and so people are commenting on the old videos where I think they're outdated. I don't delete them, though, because I think everybody should learn that it is a learning process. You start from somewhere and often working out your thoughts, and maybe those videos have some inherent quality to them that actually sparks an insight in someone else. So I don't typically delete videos. I just leave them. But a lot of it I disagree with, obviously. I've learned and grown from those experiences as well.
Well, I have a similar experience. I mean, obviously, my notions about things have evolved a lot, and they will continue to evolve. I don't expect them to be consistent with themselves, except insofar as they're consistent with this meta framework that enables inconsistency, right? So then, I try to have it be consistent, but on that level where it allows a lot of flexibility, right? But the other thing is, at the beginning, when I was making videos, I was a lot more tentative in expressing my thoughts on it, saying, well, that seems to me like blah, 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 blah. And so I think that as I've gotten more familiarized with it and talked to a lot of different people, I think one of the best ways for me, that I gather more information about it is just I talk to ISFP, and I say, "Oh, do you do this too?" Just sort of checking to see if it matches up with what I think about existing about ISFPs and their habits. And they either say, "Oh, I do. How crazy, you know that?" Or they go, "No, actually, I don't do that." And then I have to think a little bit more about revising my opinions about it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the same angle I take too. Is there's a lot of people that, if we're talking to a certain type, it's easy to bias a certain type or stereotype a type and saying, this person does this way until you actually confirm it with several people of that type. And Myers-Briggs, the biggest problem I have with Myers-Briggs is they're very confined because they're a closed system. Unlike Jungian psychology, which is very open and you're able to theorize. When it's Myers-Briggs, you're not really able to theorize because it is a closed system and it's protected and copyrighted. So it's hard to say, hey, this is MBTI, where you can say it's obviously this is a Jungian theory and that's okay, but if you say it's MBTI, it's not really correct. And I think that's the big problem. Yeah.
I didn't even know it was copyrighted. I didn't really think about it at all. I thought, well, MBTI is a shorthand way of describing the Jungian model.
Right, and it's really not. It's a pretty closed system, and that's where it's hard to input anything into MBTI. So I've been pretty adamant about sticking with, well, this is MBTI or this is a Jungian theory, and I'm all open to hearing different people's theories, but if you're claiming it's MBTI, that's like, someone claiming they're representing my company when they're not.
Right. When I talk about MBTI types, I use that expression because I think that's what people search for when they're talking about their four-letter type as derived and thought through socionics and Jungian cognitive functions. Most of what the analysis I'm doing is equivalent to socionics analysis, but I still am going to use the label MBTI because, like when I was a kid, there was certain words, I think it's still the case. People talk about give me a Kleenex when they mean give me a facial tissue, right? But it functions as both a brand name and as a generic name.
Yes, it does. It's like the same with any kind of pharmaceutical drug too. And I don't have to be too particularly anal about it, but there's certain things when you start really injecting these theories, and you not personally, of course, but just people in general, when they start saying, hey, this theory is MBTI, and the cognitive function, here's how they're portrayed in MBTI, which I think is very limiting about MBTI, but it's a great word because it's a universal language word you can use. Hey, I'm speaking about the MBTI types or the 16 types, but that's why websites are saying the 16 personality types, and they avoid the word MBTI all around. And it's because they're trying to not infringe anything on MBTI's rights. And they even got that word trademarked. MBTI is a totally trademarked word too, so they're pretty adamant about that. Of course, if you're small time like us enthusiasts, they don't really care, but if it's really big time or you're publishing work, you can't use those letters, ultimately, is what it is, unless you're using it in direct reference to them.
That's good to know. I think I'll probably take it out of my titles henceforth. I had never even thought about it. But see, I don't tend to think about those sort of things. I figure they will be revealed to me in time.
And I'm like I said, I've been a little anal about it myself. It's because when I went through the certification course, he was my instructor was also pretty anal about it. Like, this is MBTI, this is MBTI, this is not MBTI, this is a theory, this is a theory. He was so I could see what he was adhering to was those ethics and MBTI's code of ethics, and that's what I try to adhere to when I speak about MBTI in general. But I love the idea of being able to expand beyond MBTI and look at Jungian psychology and just say, okay, here's a Jungian theory based on these particular 8 cognitive functions. And as we speak, I'm trying to learn a little more about the socionic stacks and see how they actually have a role into all this, because MBTI is limited. They haven't done a lot of research on the shadow functions and how the shadow operates in personality, other than some of the contributors like, Dr. Beebe or whatever. Those contributors obviously have contributed a little bit, but there's still a lot of research to be done on the 5th through 8th functions. And there's a lot of conflicting theories. There's 2 published MBTI authors that both conflict with each other. Even MBTI doesn't even know what the attitude of the tertiary function is. There's still disagreement. So they leave that blank. So they say like an ENTJ is TENISFI. They still don't know. And so they're not publishing that type of work yet because it hasn't been released in MBTI world. Whereas Jungian psychology, most of them agree that the tertiary function is in the same orientation as the dominant now. It used to be the other way around.
Well, while I understand that they want their testing and marketing, their testing and consulting to be a product they can market, and that makes sense to me. And while I understand that they have reasonable claim to exclusivity over those sort of tests and evaluatory mechanisms, the actual work product that is used, the notion that a specific interpretive model of another model that's the engine of the first model. It's like the engine is using cognitive functions. They have a specific interpretation. I understand their claim on their exact work product, but the notion that whatever the thoughts are, the ideas are that they've specifically attributed to make this system distinct from Jungian cognitive functions is an idea. It's not something they can possess meaningfully because it's an interpretation of an existing model.
Mm-hmm. That's where the challenge is too, and it's like you can't patent MBTI. You can't patent a concept without a methodology being used. You can patent the instrument, but the actual theory and the concept is really not patentable. So that's where their challenge is, and that's why a lot of people continue using the term, because it is a kind of a generic term, and I'm really interested in hearing still your thoughts on education. How do you think it should be, in a sense, reformed from a TI angle? Because I don't agree with our current education standard as well, and I'm very interested in hearing how you think things should be taught. Because as going through institution myself and going through university, I realized that here's the idea that we think it should be, and we're going to shove this down your throat. I'm seeing questions on exams now that are saying, are pretty much in a nutshell, are businesses bad? Do they contribute to the overall degradation of the environment? Yes or no, true or false? And if it's like, if I get it wrong, then obviously businesses are bad. What kind of information are they really throwing down me where I'm not in a position to critically think anymore? And this is my biggest problem with institution in general when it comes to public education, and where public education is now focused, like I said in the comments, more on benchmarking and saying that, hey, we got to keep up with standards so we can get more funding. So here's what we got to do. We got to get more A students. We got to get more people to pass this. So let's cram information instead of letting them be able to critically think. So where do you think practical application should kick in and kind of kick in education? Kind of what are your ideas on that?
Well, practical applications. I mean, the thing is, I want to see us step back and, first of all, have a meaningful conversation about which vestigial elements, which elements of education are vestigial, because education was designed a long time ago. We're still trying to implement that system better, right? But it seems quite reasonable to conclude the whole system might be a product of limitations in the past that are no longer limitations that we face. So it used to make sense that we had to have all the kids in one room or in one building, and we had to have them stay there all day. There's this issue of transportation. There's this issue of like, well, everyone goes to work at the same time, everyone comes home at the same time. We want to organize it around that. And then there's this institution of farming, and in the summer we need to have it off because yada yada yada. And there's this perception that things need to be standardized such that we have a meaningful metric to compare students against one another, so we know who gets into college and who gets this thing and who gets that thing. But the reality is, we ought to be looking at it from an entirely different direction and say, what is this individual? What is the most fully actualized version of this individual? And the other thing is to note a lot of different things that psychology tells us. For example, anytime an individual is extrinsically motivated to do something, their intrinsic motivation to do it goes down. So I think we want to enable processes that empower the individual to attain naturally occurring intrinsic goals and be intrinsically motivated to do what they're doing. And that means making what they're doing real for them, which means allowing them to dictate the course of action they're taking. Now, to a certain extent, we have to obviously provide guidance for students. We can't just say, tell us what to do today, and they go, well, we want to do comic books. But the problem is, that's where we need to incorporate parental choice making into the equation. If we were to eliminate public schools entirely and say, here's all the money we're spending on public schools, here's a check, that much for each kid of yours, and spend it however you want, and we don't have rules about minimum number of hours they have to take and all that kind of shit, then the kid will let their parents know how to spend that money. And that money either has to be spent on that or nothing else. So if we want to try to have control mechanisms in place, that system works well enough as a control mechanism. And ultimately the kids will say, well, I want to learn, I want to do something fun, and then they should be sent to do something fun then. I mean, and then the parents, leave it up to the parents. Most parents will make wise decisions and not let their kids take candy eating class all day, every day.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest topics that's not addressed in school is actually the concept in itself of decision making and kind of how, kids are able to make decisions. and kind of look at consequences. Like you said earlier, looking at critical thinking, I think it's a talent and a skill that's not taught in education. And so I think what the advantage for a lot of students, and if strictly speaking in like Jungian psychology, is those who preference, cause and effect or, consequential thinking have an advantage over those who don't naturally in the education system, whereas other people kind of need to be taught to use that side of it, whereas school also doesn't typically teach ethics, so decision making in general is very, very excluded in the school model, and I think that's a big issue as well. And the question is, what age do we start teaching these things, and what age do you think? Was that me?
No, it was somebody else.
So, yeah, so I think somebody's saying something, but I don't know exactly.
Yeah, I don't know exactly who either. Go ahead.
But yeah, so ultimately, just decision making in general is a big topic that I've never learned in school. It's like I've had to study on my own to look at consequential thinking and look, okay, here's what this problem is, this is what this is, look at the consequences or cause and effect of this, and it came a little more natural to me, probably to you as well. Whereas I think other types may struggle with this kind of concept, and I think it should be included in education in general as a standard core curriculum.
Decision making has always been a huge challenge for me, of course, as an ENTP, and let's segue into that. But let's finish up education as a topic. I understand the two overlap, and that's why we're segueing into decision making. But let's finish up with education. I would say that beyond just empowering individual students to make decisions about what they are doing, as adults, we ought to view our responsibility as enabling their actualization according to their natures. And so to the matter of how early we can successfully type people and anticipate their interests, skills, etc., using the Jungian cognitive function model is a question I think that's significant in answering practical education questions.
The only thing I would say that could cause problems with that, I like the idea, and it would need to be further refined, but I think that could cause problems in the sense of, how everything is now, discriminatory action. Oh, you put the NPs over here, and you put the NJs over here, your categorization in this manner, I don't know if it would cause a problem with discrimination based on education model.
It depends on the metric of definition. I'm saying the metric of definition should be what the students want and like and seek. Right. So if it's directed by them, there's no imposition of a label or a track they have to stay in. I don't see any reason why they can't shift interests and try something different. I think that they'll find, if we were to actually have things set up like this, that you've got a school that's just dealing with ENTPs, and you're not an ENTP and you show up at that school, you'd get exhausted very quickly. You'd be like, these people are fucking nuts. I got to go someplace else, And if you are an ENTP, you'd be like, oh my God, let's all throw down right now. Let's just start fighting constantly, but only with words, Yeah. So and you'd feel home. You'd feel probably tired out too sometimes by it. Like, these fucking bastards are so goddamn stubborn. But that's just life in general. I think that people would find their right track, right? They'd find where they're home at.
And I think that's the idea of leaving a lot of choice in the hands of the student. And again, how much role should play and may help in making those decisions for the student at what age, and which age should it start lessening, and what age should the student be fully responsible for making their choices of their preference based on education as well. These are things, of course, I've always thought and tossed around in my own head. I'd love to hear your opinion on it, though.
Well, I mean, I think the line is 6th grade, and fifth graders. I mean, that's the line I draw for myself. Is fifth grade can do it too. Fifth grade is right on the borderline. They're half kids, half middle schoolers, and 6th grade is where I think the line should be drawn, and we need to change the existing model. But that's kind of one of the squishy things. As an ENTP, I tend to not be worried so much about the practical details that actually make shit happen as the general concept, right? Like, well, the point is that we blow everything up. That's the main point here, Chad. You're missing the point. We're supposed to be blowing shit up. You want to build things. I don't know what the problem is. All right. So on that note, let's end this video on education. Let's move on to decision making. I'll make the decision to do that, and then I also want to make sure that we have a period of question and answers. I suspect a lot of people might have questions for you, and hopefully they will provide some questioning. Thanks for watching.
I'm looking at the